Back with the Royal Enfield 350 Model G, and here we go into part 4 of the story, and hopefully we're finally getting into the closing stages of it, because I've had some fun and games waiting for and getting the correct parts I need for the front forks, and I've finally got them, and I've got a matching pair of new front fork springs of the same length, and I've got a replacement fork spring stud which at least is the same length as one of the pair that were in there, the odd pair, although it's not identical in that the little oil hole there is in a different position and the shape along the way is slightly different, but the overall length is the same, so it's going in. I ordered one spring and one stud almost a couple of weeks ago now, and spring came fairly quickly. We've had issues with postal workers being on strike, so the post has been disrupted a little bit as well, but when the spring and what I assumed would be a stud to go with it arrived, I opened the packet, this one, and there was only a spring inside it and no stud. Then we ran into the bank holiday. The package only arrived on a Saturday. The Monday was a bank holiday, so it was Tuesday before I could sort of inform anyone that there seemed to be something missing. Anyway, it looks like, as they were adamant that they had packed me a fork spring stud as well as a spring, it looks like it may have escaped. There's a very slight tear in the corner of the package there. So anyway, after much to-ing and fro-ing, I've phoned up and told them the problem, and even said that for the paltry price of what it cost, I'd even pay for another one outright if I had to, but there certainly wasn't one arrived my end with the spring. Finally I've received another one, and on the invoice I was only billed for the spring, so thank you Hitchcocks for very good service once again. We eventually got there in spite of bank holidays and postal disputes and disruptions and misunderstandings, but I think the missing item probably came out of there somewhere, so somebody out there may trip over one of these in the road or have it rattling around in the back of their van or whatever, I don't know, but finally I've got the parts I need to hopefully complete the front end of this Model G, and then finally get it off the bike lift, because it's been holding up other jobs that have been waiting. It's been on here for nearly 2 weeks with no front end now, which is why I diverted my attention to some other things, including a couple of my own bikes, which hasn't done them any harm, but hasn't really sort of helped in getting customers' machines done. But anyway, enough of the waffle. I'll get the front end reassembled now and hopefully get the front wheel on, get this bike down and ready to ride. And the weather's ready for me as well. We've had some horrendous rain here, so quite in keeping with the sort of things that we've had happen with this bike as we worked our way through it. It'd only be appropriate to have it tipping it down when I try and go out and test ride it. But first things first, I'm going to put the forks back together now, get the front wheel on, get it off the bike lift, and who knows, we might be going for a ride very soon. I've got my fork internals for the Royal Enfield Model G sorted out now, and I've got a matching set for each leg, all assembled with new springs and one replacement spring stud to make up a pair the same length as each other. So got equal length springs, equal length spring studs, and all the components are correct and clean and ready to go back together. So my next step will be to reassemble the front forks with those bits inside, and then we'll get the front wheel on and finally get this machine down and hopefully take it for a short road test. And I really thought we might never get to the point of seeing this, but here we are with that Royal Enfield Model G with its front forks back together and front wheel fitted. Both forks are the same length as each other now, both forks move and spring and rebound, and we're ready to go for a road test, I think. The only problem being, no sooner had I started to lower the bike lift down and get ready to get the bike off it, and there was a big rumble and a flash outside, and we had a thunderstorm, which seems to have passed now, but everything's very wet and miserable out there. We're getting near the end of the working day, and I don't really see the point in getting this covered in all sorts of filth as well, so we'll probably leave it for another time, I think, and look forward to part 5 of this amazing story. I'm hoping that very soon I'll be able to take a ride on this Royal Enfield Model G and find out that nothing else needs to be done with it, fingers crossed. And I thought that I'll just quickly recap on what's been done. I should probably write a list because there's a lot of it, but it started off, it came here because the owner said it was difficult to start, and well, that can mean anything, but as it happened, it was just the clutch was slipping so badly that you couldn't actually physically kick-start it very easily, because the kickstart was just going down with nothing much happening. That was thanks to the clutch being assembled incorrectly, and it also needed a little bit of attention as well. I put extra springs in there to harden it up a little bit and sorted that out. But once I got the engine running, the engine sounded a little bit rattly, so I checked the push rods and adjusted them. They adjusted up a fair way, and that quietened things down a bit, but there was still some mechanical noise which I put down to the drivetrain up to the magneto or magdyno if you prefer, but I thought I'd take the timing cover off anyway because it's not too difficult, and just have a quick look in there and make sure everything was alright, and it wasn't. We had a loose timing pinion on the end of the crank which was slopping around on its key, getting ready to shear that and possibly do all sorts of damage. So anyway, I tightened that up, and the worm nut, the oil pump worm nut that screws up against it, had a very worn cork seal in it, so I replaced that as well. While I was in there, I also checked the oil pump drivetrain, the spindle. The worm nut was okay, the spindle was okay, but the oil pumps themselves, the scavenge pump at the front of the engine was okay, but the feed pump at the rear of the timing cover, that was in a very worn state, so I changed that as well, so it was worth going in there. Then we had the two idler gears between the camshafts and the magneto drive pinion that are supposed to have a thrust washer on either side of them, and I found that they only had one washer on each, so I got some washers and sorted that out as well. So finally I got the engine running nice and quietly and smoothly, and it does actually sound really good. Next up, the owner told me he must have managed to run it at some point because he told me it wasn't charging, so I had a look at the dynamo and there was nothing coming out of that. So I cleaned the brushes and the end of the commutator that the brushes run on, and that seemed to wake the dynamo up and get that charging, but there was still nothing getting through to the electrical system on the bike. So I had a look at the regulator, and I found that the contacts in the regulator, like points, were dirty, so I cleaned them and that got that working. While I was looking at the regulator, I found that a little bolt going through the frame was actually loose, so I tightened that up. So that was another one that was unexpected, but I found it. Now that basically had the engine running nicely and charging and everything pretty much ready to go, so I thought I'd probably take it for a short run up and down the lane and see how things were on it, but I also noticed that the front forks weren't moving, they seemed to be stuck solid. But I thought not to worry, we'll just go up and down the lane on it, see if the engine's pulling well and see if I can get all the gears, things like that, check the clutch operation and so on, and go from there. But I noticed that the rear brake felt a bit spongy, so as I sort of pulled away down the lane, I jabbed my foot on the brake pedal a couple of times thinking that it might sort of take up, and I was going to carry on doing it up and down the lane, just applying the rear brake a little bit under power and perhaps see if I could bed anything in or whatever, but that wasn't to be because I only went a matter of a few yards and there was a big bang and the rear wheel locked up because of the torque arm that someone had made for it had a forked end here, so when I applied the brake plate just slewed round, pulled the torque arm away from the frame and pulled the brake arm on even harder than it was already. The shoes inside the brake turned out to be so worn that the brake arm was able to pull the mechanism right over the cam, so that locked it up even more until I got the spanners out and disconnected the brake rod, which got bent. I sorted all that out and put new brake shoes in there and put that all back together, and we got a train. Probably hear that. We do get trains on this crossing, you see. Anyway, I put all the back brake in order, and then I thought I'd better probably have a look at the front forks and see if I could get them moving. So I took the front wheel off, obviously, and surprise surprise, I found that the front brake was in good condition with good brake shoes in it, because I thought there was going to be all sorts of horrors in there as well. But the forks were stuck because they'd been assembled dry and dirty, so I cleaned them up, put some oil in them, put them back together, and then when I got them moving, I not only found that one fork leg appeared to be longer than the other, but also that we had an oil leak coming from here, which turned out to be because this wasn't screwed on very tightly. So I took that off, put well seal on the threads, screwed it up tightly, put it back together, but there was definitely something wrong with the forks in that one appeared to be longer than the other. So I stripped them right down, and now obviously I found out the fork springs were of different lengths, and even the fork spring studs weren't the same as each other. So I finally managed to put all that right. And one last little unpleasant surprise was that there were, on each of these, there was one stud and one bolt, and it turned out that each of the studs that were left, one in each leg, were the originals, but the bolts were actually M8 8mm thread stainless steel bolts that someone had screwed into the original threads in the aluminium fork leg. Now luckily, on this side, the threads weren't really too damaged at all, and a correct stud screwed in there nicely, although I did put thread lock compound on it. It's screwed in nice and tightly, and that's done up tightly. But on the other side, on this side, I couldn't get the stud to screw in. It was just going round and round and round, so I had to helicoil that and then fit the stud. So I've done that and fitted the correct nuts on the studs that were there left in place. So we now got proper imperial threads of the correct sizes there, holding the front wheel on, no less, as it looks like the front wheel could have probably just decided to have jumped out as it was. And that's a restored machine for you. But I think I'm finally at a point where I'm ready to go out and take a ride on it, and hopefully the weather might be a little bit better tomorrow, and we might finally get a go on it and see what it's like on the road, and that hopefully it may even be good enough to go home, fingers crossed. I really can't think of anything else unless something shows up while I'm riding it tomorrow, if it's going to be a nice enough day to take it out, because I don't want to get it all messed up, because it's cosmetically it is a very nicely restored machine, but there were so many potential killers on it and other little things that were just irritations that I really thought that I might have had to make a list up to reel them all off, but I think I've done that. So I'll stop now, and hopefully my next video will begin with us out by the brick wall there, getting ready to go for a ride, all being well.